What if we've been looking in the wrong place for the Red Sea crossing? In 1978, Ron Wyatt came to this beach and claimed he found evidence of Pharaoh's army beneath these waters. Was this where Moses crossed the Red Sea? Do the waters still have a story to tell us? The real Red Sea crossing, Ron Wyatt's discovery. For thousands of years, one of the most dramatic stories in the Bible has captured the imagination of generations. A nation of slaves, a pursuing army, a trapped people standing at the edge of the sea. And then, the waters divide. The Israelites walk through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water standing on either side of them. And when Pharaoh's army follows, the waters return. The Egyptian army is destroyed. For most people, the story ends there. But what if the question isn't whether the Red Sea crossing happened, but where it happened? For centuries, people have pointed to different locations. Some have proposed lakes and marshes in northern Egypt. Others have pointed toward the traditional Gulf of Suez. But in 1978, an American amateur biblical researcher named Ron Wyatt traveled to Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. What he saw would completely change the way we see the Exodus. Wyatt became convinced that the Israelites did not cross the Gulf of Suez. He believed they traveled much further south, to the Gulf of Aqaba. And according to Ron Wyatt, he had found the very beach where Moses and the Israelites stood trapped between Pharaoh's army and the sea. The location? Nuweiba. And beneath the waters offshore, Wyatt claimed to have discovered something extraordinary. Objects that appeared to be the remains of ancient Egyptian chariots. If Wyatt was right, the implications were enormous. Because this wouldn't merely give us another possible location for the Exodus. It would give us a geographical setting that appears to fit several details of the biblical story all at once. So, what exactly did Ron Wyatt discover? And could this really be the place where Moses crossed the Red Sea? Number 1. The problem with the traditional location. Let's begin with the basic question. Where did the Israelites cross? The Bible uses the Hebrew expression Yam Suf. It's commonly translated into English as Red Sea. But the Hebrew word Suf has generated considerable discussion, and some scholars translate the expression as Sea of Reeds. The question becomes, what body of water did the biblical writers actually have in mind? There are several possibilities, and this is where geography becomes extremely important. Exodus chapter 14 tells us that God commanded Moses to change direction. Instead of taking the most direct route toward the land of Canaan, Israel was directed toward the sea. God told Moses, "Encamp before Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon." That description is important because the Israelites weren't simply standing beside an enormous open coastline. They were apparently in a very specific geographical position. Then Pharaoh hears that the Israelites have become trapped. And Exodus 14:3 records Pharaoh saying, "They are entangled in the land. The wilderness has shut them in." Think about that. trapped. The Israelites have the Egyptian army behind them, the sea in front of them, and according to the biblical account, the surrounding geography prevents them from simply escaping in another direction. Ron Wyatt believed there was a location that fits this description remarkably well. A massive beach surrounded by mountains with essentially one major entrance. That location was Nuweiba. Number 2. Ron Wyatt arrives at Nuweiba. Nuweiba is located on the western shore of the Gulf of Aqaba. Today, it's in Egypt. And when Ron Wyatt first saw it in 1978, something immediately caught his attention. The beach was enormous. It was large enough to accommodate an immense population along with their animals. But the really interesting feature wasn't simply the size of the beach. It was the geography surrounding it. Mountains rise around the beach. At one end, the mountains create a natural barrier. And at the northern end, there are remains that Wyatt identified as an ancient Egyptian fortress. Ron Wyatt believed this could correspond to Pi Hahiroth, one of the locations mentioned in Exodus 14. His proposed scenario was remarkably simple. The Israelites enter the beach through a narrow valley system. They arrive at the shoreline. Then Pharaoh's army enters behind them. Now the Israelites are trapped. To their north, an ancient Egyptian military installation. To their south are mountains that extend toward the sea. Behind them is Pharaoh's army. In front of them, the Gulf of Aqaba.
We did do that. He was interested in trying to find the site because scientists always kept trying to say that they crossed in the Sea of Reeds, which was ankle deep at a certain time of year and stuff. And Dad wanted to prove that it was a biblical miracle. Mm-hmm. And so he tried to trace their steps from Egypt. And basically he did. He got an airplane and he had this guy named Moses, actually. Yeah. That's no lie. We hired a pilot in Eilat and his name was Moses, and he flew us up and down through there, and Dad told him what we're looking for. We're looking for a valley that goes all the way through the mountains from here, from the Sinai Peninsula to here. And the guy said, oh yeah, there is one. And back then there wasn't a road even down it, but now they have a road down there.
All the way through, yeah.
It keeps washing out all the time. But anyway, we found that, and it was perfect description of what the Bible said, is they wandered through the valley and got turned.
It's exactly the kind of geographical situation that makes Exodus 14:3 so dramatic. They are entangled in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. But there was still one enormous problem. If this really was the crossing site, how did the Israelites get across the Gulf of Aqaba? The Gulf is not a shallow pond. It is a serious body of water. In places, the Gulf reaches hundreds of meters in depth. So why would Wyatt believe that Moses could have led an enormous population across it? His answer involved the underground geography. Number 3, the underwater land bridge. Look at a map of the Gulf of Aqaba. The Nuweiba beach sits on the western side. Saudi Arabia lies across the Gulf. In between the two coastlines is a remarkable underwater feature. A relatively shallow underwater ridge extends from Nuweiba area toward the opposite shore. the surrounding portions of the Gulf become dramatically deeper. Ron Wyatt believed this underwater formation could have provided the path of the Exodus. Now this is where we need to be careful. The existence of an underwater ridge is not evidence by itself that Moses crossed there. The question is whether the biblical account could correspond to this geography. Exodus 14 says that God caused a strong east wind to blow. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went into the midst of the sea on dry ground. The biblical text does not describe Moses discovering a convenient sandbar and simply walking around the water. It describes something supernatural. The waters are divided, and the Israelites walk through. Ron Wyatt's theory, therefore, did not require the underwater ridge itself to perform the miracle. Rather, he believed the ridge provided the geographical path along which the Israelites crossed when God divided the waters. And there is another fascinating feature. The deepest waters are located on either side of the ridge. So if the waters were miraculously pushed away, the Israelites would have had water rising on both sides of their path, which sounds remarkably similar to Exodus 14:22. The waters were a wall to them on their right and on their left. Again, that doesn't prove the event happened at Nuweiba, but it does explain why Ron Wyatt found the geography so compelling. Number 4. The chariot wheels. According to accounts from Wyatt and his associates, divers began examining the seafloor of the Gulf of Aqaba in 1978. And there, they reported finding objects that appeared to be ancient chariot components. Coral had grown over some of the objects, making identification difficult. But among the reported discoveries were wheel-like objects and other structures that Wyatt believed were consistent with ancient Egyptian chariots. This is where the story becomes controversial. Wyatt's supporters have argued that the objects are exactly what we should expect if Pharaoh's army entered the sea after Israel. The Bible says, "The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea. All Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen, and his army. Then the waters returned. The army was destroyed." So if the Gulf of Aqaba really was the crossing site, where would we expect the remains to be? On the seafloor. And that's precisely where Ron Wyatt said he found them. He reported finding what appeared to be chariot wheels, axle components, and other possible military debris. Wyatt's published account specifically states that on the first dive at the site in 1978, he and his sons found chariot remains. But here's where we have to separate discovery from interpretation. Seeing something underwater that resembles a wheel does not automatically establish that it is an ancient Egyptian chariot wheel. And the claims surrounding the underwater artifacts have never achieved the level of independent archaeological confirmation that would make them universally accepted. That's an important part of this story. Ron Wyatt believed he had discovered evidence of Pharaoh's army. His supporters believe the underwater photographs and reported finds deserve serious consideration. Critics argue that the objects have not been sufficiently authenticated and that the evidence is inconclusive. So the honest question isn't, can we simply declare these wheels proven? The honest question is, why did Ron Wyatt think they were chariot wheels in the first place? And why did the location itself make the discovery so compelling? Number 5. Why Ron Wyatt connected the chariots to the Exodus. The answer comes down to context. Finding an isolated wheel underwater would be interesting. Finding an ancient wheel underwater in the middle of a proposed ancient crossing route would be far more interesting. Wyatt wasn't simply looking at the random objects on the seafloor. He was looking for evidence that fit a larger geographical model. He believed the Israelites entered Nuweiba through the Wadi Wader. They arrived at the enormous beach. They were trapped. Pharaoh's army followed. The Israelites crossed the Gulf. And Pharaoh's army followed them into the sea. Then the waters returned. If that sequence occurred, Ron Wyatt reasoned the Egyptian military equipment should have been left behind on the seafloor, and that is exactly what he believed he discovered. He also argued that the coral growth made sense. Coral had attached itself to the objects and over time obscured their original appearance. This is why some of Ron Wyatt's underwater photographs became so famous among Christian researchers. Certain coral formations appear to resemble wheels. Others appear to contain circular structures. And some supporters have pointed to differences in wheel construction as potentially corresponding to Egyptian chariot technology. But again, we should distinguish the claim from the proof. Ron Wyatt reported the discovery. Ron Wyatt interpreted the objects as chariot remains. The archaeological community has not universally accepted that identification. And that distinction matters. Because if we're going to tell the story of Ron Wyatt, we don't need to exaggerate what he found. The story is fascinating enough on its own. Number 6. The other side of the Gulf. Wyatt's theory didn't stop at the Egyptian shoreline. If the Israelites crossed the Gulf of Aqaba, where did they come out? On the opposite side. Modern-day Saudi Arabia. And this created another interesting connection. Wyatt believed that the location on the Saudi side corresponded to the biblical route toward Mount Sinai. He later became convinced that the true Mount Sinai was not traditional Jebel Musa in Egypt, but a mountain in northwestern Saudi Arabia, Jebel Alaz. That theory would become one of the defining elements of Wyatt's larger Exodus model. The Red Sea crossing and Mount Sinai were now connected. The Israelites weren't simply crossing a body of water and wandering randomly through the desert. Ron Wyatt believed he had constructed a route. Egypt, the wilderness, Nuweiba, the Gulf of Aqaba, Saudi Arabia, and finally, Mount Sinai. There was even another feature that Wyatt considered significant. He reported finding stone pillars associated with the crossing area and believed they'd been erected by King Solomon to commemorate the event. His interpretation of those pillars also has been heavily debated. So once again, we have a fascinating claim. but not one that should be presented as universally established archaeology. Number 7. Could they have reached Nuweiba? One of the immediate objections to Wyatt's theory is distance. If the Israelites left Egypt, why would they travel all the way across the Sinai Peninsula? Wouldn't that take too long? Ron Wyatt believed the answer was no. He pointed to a historical comparison. In the 20th century, Israeli forces under Moshe Dayan marched from the Nuweiba area toward the Suez region in approximately 6 days. Wyatt used that as evidence that the journey was logistically possible. In a 1996 talk, Wyatt argued that the Israelites could have reached the Gulf of Aqaba within the biblical time frame, emphasizing that they traveled with divine guidance both day and night. Of course, a modern military march is not the same thing as moving an ancient population containing families, children, livestock, and possessions. So the comparison isn't proof. But it does answer one objection. The distance itself does not make the journey physically impossible. The real question is whether the biblical itinerary actually points us there. And that brings us back to the Bible. Number 8, the biblical clues. Consider the clues. Exodus says Israel was trapped. It mentions Pi-Hahiroth, Migdol, Baal-Zephon, mountains, the sea, a narrow approach, a massive crossing, and then a journey toward Sinai. Ron believed Nuweiba brought all of these pieces together better than the traditional locations. He wasn't merely saying, "I found some wheels underwater." His argument was much larger. Geography, biblical geography, ancient routes, the physical shape of the land, the underwater terrain, and finally, the reported artifacts. That combination convinced him that the Gulf of Aqaba was not merely a possibility. He believed that it was the actual crossing site. But even to this day, the debate continues. Some scholars argue for locations further north, including areas associated with the Gulf of Suez or the northern Sinai. Others continue to argue for the Gulf of Aqaba. Even the translation of Yam Suf remains part of the debate. For example, Yale Bible Study notes that the term can be translated Sea of Reeds, while also acknowledging that Yam Suf is used somewhere in the scripture in connection with the Gulf of Aqaba. So the question remains open. Number 9. What did Ron Wyatt really discover? Perhaps the most important thing about Ron Wyatt's Red Sea discovery isn't whether every artifact he identified will someday be accepted by mainstream archaeology. It's the question he forced people to ask. What if the traditional map is wrong? What if we've been looking in the wrong place? What if the biblical description of the Exodus is more geographically precise than we've ever assumed? Ron Wyatt believed the Bible gave us clues, and he followed those clues into the desert. In 1978, he stood on a massive beach beside the Gulf of Aqaba. He looked at the mountains. He looked at the narrow entrance. He looked across the water toward Arabia. And then he went beneath the surface. What he reported seeing convinced him that this was no ordinary beach. He believed it was the place where an enslaved nation stood trapped between Pharaoh and the sea. The place where Moses lifted his staff. The place where God divided the waters. And the place where Pharaoh's army met its end. Whether every part of Ron Wyatt's interpretation can be ultimately proven is still debated. But one thing is certain. His discovery changed the conversation forever. Because the Red Sea crossing is no longer simply a story on a Sunday school map. It's a question of geography, a question of archaeology, a question of ancient history, and ultimately, a question of what happened thousands of years ago when the people of Israel stood at the edge of the sea. The Bible says they had nowhere to go, but God made a way. And if Ron Wyatt was right, we now know where that was. The Gulf of Aqaba, Nuweiba, the Red Sea crossing, and perhaps the most extraordinary archaeological mystery of the Exodus.
Well, I believe that we are living in the last generation on planet Earth as it is today. And I believe that God is getting everyone's attention so that no one will be lost without having had an opportunity to see the truth and accept it and to make the necessary changes. I believe that I was the only one that volunteered at the time when God was ready to reveal all these things. And like my critics say, it's impossible for one person to find all these things. And that's true. But all things are possible through God. And He simply revealed all of these things in a manner where no one should be misled as to who has revealed this. I'm not clever enough to have found all these places and objects. So this is something that God has taken into His own hands and is doing a show and tell presentation of His treasures, His archaeological treasures, in a manner that is designed to strengthen the faith of the believers and to convince those who have seen no good reason to believe what Christians have to say, to convince them that the Bible is historically accurate and divinely inspired.